My paranormal experiences have been happening for as long as I can remember. I used to actually say that if somebody says, what happened to you? Instead of saying, well, I can tell you what didn't happen. Like if you could look at all the things that could happen that would be considered paranormal, it would be a shorter list to say what didn't happen. Like I never saw the Mothman. And at that time, I never saw a werewolf, or pretty much so many things. One thing that comes to mind would be, well, what I call a turn up. Something that disappears and then it turns up in a bizarre place. And Paul was my partner who passed away. So Paul and I were sitting on the porch. And again, like I was saying before, now in Arizona, we do live very remote. So we were sitting there talking, and I had my cell phone. I went inside and set it down on the counter, got coffee, and brought it back out and gave Paul his, and I sat down. And then we were talking, and he said, well, to make a call, and I couldn't find my cell phone. So, I left it inside. So I went back to get it, and it wasn't there on the counter where I left it. And there was only one way in. I mean, the only other way out was to climb out windows on the other side of the building. And all those windows had screens on them. So somebody would have to take the screens out, climb in, take the phone, and go back out and replace the screens. And I didn't even think a bird would do that. Anyway, so what happened was we were tripping about, where's the phone? Where's the phone? It had only been 5 minutes. And I was thinking they couldn't have gone. And he said, well, maybe you said it somewhere else and you forgot. So I took his telephone. I started calling my phone with his phone. And all of a sudden, his phone started ringing. So I said, Paul, somebody's calling you. And they're using my phone. So I answered. And it was a guy that knew Paul who lived like 5 miles from here. And he said, did you lose a cell phone? And I was, yeah. And he said, well, he was on his way to work and he was driving down the old dirt road and he came around a bend and he saw something kind of flash. So he slowed down to see what it was. He got out of his truck and walks over and there's a cell phone sitting on a rock way out in the middle of nowhere. So he gets the cell phone and he looks at it and it says Donna on it. And he says, well, the only Donna I know is Paul's Donna. So he called Paul to find out if I lost my phone. So like, yeah. So we rode out and met him out at the main highway and got my phone. And it's like, how did my phone get from my counter 5 miles out into the middle of nowhere sitting on a rock? Unless a large bird got into the side, got a hold of it, flew out the window, flew across the... You know what I'm saying? It's just not, there's no explanation. And so that's what I call a turn up, where something would disappear and suddenly turn up in a bizarre place and with no explanation. So that's one of those things that I would say, oh, well, that's just one of those things that I'll never be able to explain. And maybe God is trying to tell you something. It's a call. So it's weird stuff like that. But there has been like ghostly situations where I accidentally recorded a voice phenomenon I was outside and I wanted to, again, at this time, there was no neighbors anywhere around. People just don't come out here. And if they are going to come out, I know about it. But I went outside I wanted to try to see if I could record the thunder because I was going to share that, with a friend of mine. So I'm listening for the thunder, waiting for a thunderclap. It never did happen, but then I thought, I give up. So I came back inside and I went and listened to the recording. And on that recording, a voice, it sounds like a young Hispanic accent. And this voice says, can I lay down? It was clear as a bell. Can I lay down? And I'm like, what? And I kept replaying it. And I'm like, what? Can I lay down? What? So, of course, when Paul got home, I played it for him, and then I sent it to a friend of mine so she could hear it, and she was like, Donna, that's electric voice phenomena. And that's really clear. They usually aren't that clear. That's so clear. It's very, very definitely, he says, can I lay down? Weird. So usually they're just weird things like that don't bother me. They're interesting, but they're not scary. But one that was scary I felt threatened was one time there was something outside that I took a picture. It looked like a big old, uh, like a cowboy hat kind of thing, way over, because where the mountain side is. And I was like, what is that? So I took a picture with my cell phone. And then I went to send the picture to my brother, who at that time was living in Utah, and it wouldn't send. And I'm like, what's going on with this? So uh, I couldn't figure out why my phone kept shutting off. So I thought, well, something's wrong with the phone. Battery's okay. Everything's okay. So I try again. And every time I tried to send it, my phone would shut off. So then I sent a picture of one of my cats and it went right through. So I'm thinking, oh, good. My phone's working again. So I tried to send that picture again and it wouldn't work. My phone shut off. So I turned my phone back on and I got a notification that I got a text message. So I looked and there was a text message and it didn't say where it came from. It just said, the media that you are trying to retrieve has been removed. Any further attempt to retrieve or share this media will result in severe consequences. And the picture was no longer in my gallery. And then I got scared because I thought, okay, something, someday, someone out there knows I took that picture, knows I had that picture, had the power to shut off my phone, had the power to remove it from my gallery, and now it's sending me a threatening message. So I went inside and just sat down. I was afraid, like, whoever they are, who are they? How do they know what's going on? And I thought, can they see me through my walls? Can they see me when I'm sitting in my house? Can they see me through my phone? I just felt threatened and weird. And I did not, when Paul got home, I showed him and he was like, that's weird. And I was thinking, if it was just any strange thing in the sky, who would care if I share? I see pictures of UFOs. I see stuff online all the time. Why are they allowed to share? How come I wasn't going to be allowed to share that picture? And stuff like that. Just different experiences with ghosts, other hauntings that I just got to the point where, like, one time I felt like something entered and came walking down towards my bed. And at first I thought, oh no, home invader, because again, Paul wasn't home at that time. Paul was at family's house back east. So I was alone and I'm like, and then I got the realization inside me, oh, this is spirit. This is not flesh. This isn't a person. This is spirit. And by this time I had so many experiences. I wasn't even afraid anymore. I just was tired and I was like, I can't be bothered. And I felt the mattress depressed next to me. And I felt like a hand lay on my thigh because I was laying on my right side. So the hand laid down on my left side. I felt it. And I felt the mattress depressed. And I was like, I can't be bothered. Most people would run out of the house screaming and say, I'm never going to go back in there. But at this point, I'm like, whatever. And I'm like, just, okay, fine, whatever. If you want to sit there, sit there. And I just went ahead and went to sleep. No, most people this is unbelievable to people. Oh, come on, Donnie, if that happened, you'd have run out. You'd have been scared. But if they understood after 60 years how many weird things have happened and nothing ever came of it. And I thought, well, if anything was going to hurt me by now, if one of those ghosts were going to really, I just expected to be another one of those, they're just there. I just called it the tired ghost, just passing through, wanted to sit down. But there were psychic things Paul used to get all the time. Paul would tell me he knew about the Mandalay Bay shooting. He told me something's going on in Las Vegas. And I'm like, what? And he says, I don't know. It's like something big is happening in Las Vegas and people have been killed. But he said, I can't tell if it was a fire or a plane crash or what, but we'll hear about it. You'll hear about it on the news. And that night, when I went to bed, I saw all these faces of people that I didn't recognize. In like my sleep, I kept trying to sleep, but I kept seeing faces of like a procession of people. And The next day we found out, sure enough, there'd been a shooting from the Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. Every time Paul's been right on about, he told me about Susan Smith and her little boys. He just knew stuff. And I don't know how Paul knew stuff, but he was the best partner for me because he could relate to my paranormal stuff and I could relate to his. We always knew that we both were like that. And I mean, people were angry with him when he was telling them that Susan Smith did it herself. And he was calling her every name in the book. And people were like, oh my gosh, how can you talk like that about this poor woman who lost her little boys were kidnapped? And he'd be like, that beep knows exactly where her boys are. That beep did it herself, that kind of thing. And nobody believed him, but Paul was right. He said, look at her. You can tell she's lying. And he was just really, he knew when there was going to be an earthquake in a certain place, and he told me a month in advance, well, there's going to be an earthquake. It's going to be centered around Klamath Falls. What? An earthquake in Oregon? Sure enough, there'd be an earthquake centered right in Klamath Falls. So I don't know where he got his ability to see things, but I have that too, but not to the extent that Paul had it. Boy, he knew stuff, but I don't know how I knew stuff that I knew either. So when the things happened, I didn't get upset. I just didn't. I would think, okay, another ghost, another moment in Weirdville. And like I said, the only time I remember really getting scared was when I got that threatening message about severe consequences from some unknown entity, and I got scared of the Dogman situation. But otherwise, I believed in ghosts because I had experience with them. I believed in angels. I had a couple of really wonderful experiences where, not to get religious on you, but oh my gosh, this was fantastic, where I believed in Jesus. And I had this thought fall in my head years and years and years ago when I was married to a man named Richard, who has also passed away. But we lived in a village of Arroyo Grande in California at that time. And I didn't have a phone. I had to walk to the phone booth. Well, there's a man sitting down by the phone booth this one day, and it just falls into my head out of the blue. Go up and say to that man, hey, do you know Jesus? And I was like, I'm not going to do anything like that. Where did that thought from? It's like, where did that come from? And I'm like, no, but I felt real nervous about it. So I deliberately walked out of my way to go to a different phone booth. But I could still see that one from across the road there. And I watched, and when I got done with my conversation, I hung up and I looked, and he wasn't by the phone booth anymore because it was still hitting me on my brain. He'll ask that guy. And I'm like, that's so weird. You don't go up to strangers and say that. So I just went on my way. So as I was walking, when I got just almost home, there was a wall there where the 7-Eleven store was. And there was a very thin alley that maybe a dog could squeeze through, a small dog, and right up against our fence. And everything else was open where you could see nobody there. So I'm merrily walking home, and all of a sudden that man is sitting there, leaning up, sitting against the wall of the 7-Eleven. And I'm like, oh my God, it's that guy. Where did he come from? So I casually am walking along, and he says, excuse me. And I turn and I'm like, yes. Do you happen to know what time it is? Yeah, it's probably, I don't know, 4:30 in the afternoon. Thank you. So I walk. Excuse me. I'm like, yes. Would you happen to know the temperature? And I'm thinking, the temperature? Who asks about that? So I'm feeling the air with my fingers going, oh, maybe 68. He said, thank you. So I start walking. He says, excuse me. So I just kind of turn on a heel, right? I know something's coming. And I'm like, yes. And he just said, what were you supposed to ask me? You didn't ask me. And I was just filled with chills all over my body. And I went, oh my God, I was supposed to ask you. I could barely speak. I was like, I was supposed to ask you if you know Jesus. And he said, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. thank you for asking. And then he just disappeared into thin air right in front of me. And I was like, what just happened? What just happened? What just happened? I'm back and forth. What? I'm pacing. People going down the road probably thought I was on drugs because I'm walking back and forth. And I ran around the corner, ran into the 7-Eleven. I'm like, did he come in here? Is he in here? And they're like, ooh, you're the only one in here. And I'm like, but there was someone. They said, no. So I just went ahead and went home. And I was like, was that an angel? I swear that was an angel. I mean, what else? But it was a wonderful experience because it did something to renew my faith and just, wow, I was going to tell you about the black dog, not a Dogman, a real dog. Well, one night, and I remember we lived pretty far out. This was Paul and I, and it was in the early 2000s. And there's the crossroads where you're coming down the paved road. And then you come upon where the dirt road crosses and where we had to turn right to drive on out to our place. And there was a dog there. It was late night, like the midnight hour, because we'd been in town and we'd been there late. We're getting home late. And there was a black dog, like a Labrador Retriever type dog, standing in the middle of the road. And we're thinking, oh no, somebody dumped a dog. And we're going to try to get this dog and rescue him. But he wouldn't come to us, and he just wandered off into the deserts. And we're like, okay, he wandered off into the brush and stuff. And well, so we just said, okay. So we came home feeling bad for the dog, but life went on. Well, we didn't put it together, but the next day we found out that Veronica, we called her Randy, Ron and Randy, lived on that corner. And that night she had died in her sleep. But when we heard that, we forgot all about the black dog. Well, about 3 months later, we remember coming home late one night, same thing, same black dog, same place. And we're like, oh my God, it's the same dog. He's there again. Let's try to get him. Same thing. He just wandered off. So we got home. We're sitting up real late, sitting up at the table playing cards. And all of a sudden we heard far off in the distance, the neighbor out around, they were like maybe a quarter of a mile away. We could hear, ooh, and Paul says, you hear that? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, John Barnes just died. I'm like, what? He said, John just died. You hear that? Every dog is howling, but Buddy isn't howling. John just died. And we're like, oh my gosh, you're probably right, Paul, because Paul is always right. Sure enough, old man Barnes had passed away that very night. But still, I didn't think that black dog had anything to do with anything. So about several months later, Paul had a really, one of his best friends of the whole wide world, Jim was his name. And we have basement. Paul was down in the basement dugout part of the property, and I was up washing dishes. And I have a courtyard. So like where the property is, where, in my living space, I have a courtyard built around it with a little gate. And I'm hearing bark, 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 bark. So I go outside and I'm thinking because out here, the people that live far enough away, you still know who they are and you know their dogs. So this was not. I go out there and it's the black Labrador dog. And I'm like, oh my God. Well, hello, boy. And I opened the gate. And I'm like, well, come on in. And he wouldn't come in. He just stared at me and walked off. So then I went back in, started doing back to work and bark, bark, bark. I went out. Same thing. Came back in. Third time he's barking at so I said, okay, I put down my dish towel. I'm like, you know what? This dog wants me to follow him. I get it. So I go out and I open the gate and I said, well, tell me what's wrong. Tell me what's wrong. And I start following the dog and now he vanishes. The dog just vanished. I'm like, what the heck? What's going on? I'm tripping out. Paul comes walking up from the basement and he's got his phone in his hand and he says, well, Jim passed away. And I'm like, oh no. Jim's son called Paul to let Paul know that Jim passed away that night. Or the night before this. So I'm like, but did you see the dog? He says, who? I said, the dog. The black dog was just here. Paul says, no, I didn't see him. I said, you didn't hear him barking? No, I didn't hear anything. I said, okay. Well, the following October, when they play all the weird shows on TV, there was a show about Irish, Scottish myths and legends, which That's my people from the old world. We're from Ireland, Scotland. So there was Irish, Scottish myths and legends. So I was watching this TV show and it talked about the banshee. I'd heard about the banshee. Then it said there's also legends of the black dog, that the black dog will appear in the crossroads at midnight when somebody is going to die. And then I just broke out in goosebumps. I'm like, oh my gosh. The black dog in the crossroads at midnight. Veronica died. The black dog in the crossroads at midnight. John died. And the black dog actually came to my very door, to the gate, to tell me about Jim. And I was like, that's true. It really is true. And if there's a black dog, then there must be a banshee. So all these things that people say aren't real are real. Well, I shared that story anonymously on Reddit to someone. And then I got a message off of Reddit asking that I go on, if I would mind going on Terror in the Woods or some program. They said they'd look for stories for their show. And would I mind telling my experience? Paul and I could share our black dog experience. But I said no. I had never heard of the show. I guess there is a show, but I had never heard of it. And I thought, well, it wasn't terror. There was nothing terrifying about that dog. It was a friendly dog. It's sad that the dog was a messenger of a sad thing, but the dog wasn't a bad dog. And I heard tales that the black dog has actually led children out of the woods when they were lost. So the black dog was not a terror, and it didn't happen in the woods. So I felt like, it wouldn't be legitimate for it to be on their show. Plus, I think that a lot of those shows take a lot of liberties, and they add things and they sensationalize and exaggerate, and I didn't want that. So I just declined. And it's strange because I always thought that the black dog would show up when Paul passed away, but he didn't. And the night that he passed away, that was another interesting thing, was that his brother Dallas had passed away several years earlier. And they were pretty close, but he had an appointment in the morning to get blood work, the lab work, and they're saying our goodnights and everything. I told him, you have to get to sleep because I got to get you up in the morning and take you in for your labs. And he said, that's okay, because Dallas is coming to get me. And Paul was very, very ill. He got very ill during the last, year of his life. And it was expected that I was going to lose him. And I knew at that point that it could be any day. But when he said, that's okay, Dallas is coming to get me. After that, I was like, Lord, is this an omen? Is this the night? Because I've heard that when a person dies, that their relatives that died before them, or people, or even a pet, will come to greet them and lead them over to the other side. So when he said Dallas is coming to get me, I took it very seriously. And sure enough, that night he passed away in his sleep. He just went to sleep and didn't wake up. So that was a very sad day in my life, but it also had a paranormal aspect to it, in the respect that I really believe that Dallas came and escorted him. And that, in a very sad time, that was a very comforting thing, very comforting. And I used to tell Paul, I love these range cattle. Oh gosh, they're beautiful, but they're wild. You don't go up to them, especially the bulls, because they're very, they're very protective of their women, So I used to say, oh, Paul, I would love to just be able to just touch one of those bulls. Well, the day after Paul passed away, a bull, a huge Brahma bull, came straight up to my door. I mean, I got up in the morning, I opened my door, and there was a Brahma bull on my, not on my porch, but up to and I was like, what? No way. I was kind of scared, and, I backed up, and what are you doing here? And that bull lingered and lingered around this property, around this courtyard, around my vehicle. When I went to get in my car to make a run to town, the Brahma bull followed me to my car and stood right by my car, right by the window. And I was like, is this Paul or Paul, are you making this bull do that? It's like, is this a message from the other side? Like trying to tell me I'm still here. It was extraordinarily comforting. Wild bulls don't do that. They don't wander off away from the herd and come onto someone's place and just kind of linger around. Cause I was like, where are your people? Where's the rest of the herd? Why are you by yourself? But he was alone without the rest of the herd. And then after about the third day, he just wandered off, said goodbye and left. And it was just like, that to me was extraordinary. And I can't say, oh, that was paranormal, but I can say it was, as someone who just lost their best friend of 30 years, I can say that it was extremely extraordinary and extremely comforting, because he went over and even laid right at the foot of Paul's truck for a long, long time and leaned up against it like, this is my truck. I'm like, oh my God. I don't believe that Paul was possessing the bull, but I think that Paul was leading the bull around so that I could do what it's like. Now that I'm on the other side, I have the power to make your wish come true. So now that I am on the other side, I have the power to lead this bull to you, right to the door. So your wish can, like I'm still here, Donna, and your wish is my command. Cause he always was like that. I mean, he always was. If anything that I wished, if he could do it, he would. Anyway, so yeah, I've just had like a lot of different paranormal experiences, and I think most of them centered around a UFO type situation or a ghost spirit situation. But there was a few, like I said, some that they seem to be different each time. I did have a friend when I was a child who was just like a mother to me. I was so weird that I always thought my mother didn't love me. But what it really was that I was so weird that my mother had a little bit of eerie feeling towards me that I interpreted wrong, because my mom knew that something was going on with her daughter. And her religious upbringing was that this isn't okay. But I was able to work things out with my mother. But most of my experiences, I didn't have either only Paul was a witness to it, or my brother Billy was a witness to it, or nobody was. But this time, hundreds and hundreds of people. It was back in 1979. It was a Thursday night. I had just finished watching Barney Miller, and there was this brilliant, brilliant light. And at that time, I lived in Grover City, which is now called Grover Beach, California. And there was this huge, I thought the moon was the brightest thing that night. It was penetrating into my living room through the drapes. And they were thick drapes. And I had a blind that pulled down, but it was a huge picture window. And it faced out towards the beach. And I was like, what is going on? Dang, the moon is so bright. That's irritating. Well, then I had to go to the other side of the house that faced out towards the east. And I went in the kids' room and anyway, as I'm walking down the hall out of their room, I looked out their window and I said, what a beautiful full moon. And then I thought, wait a minute, if that's the moon, then what's that over there? So I came back around to the other side of the house and I peeked just out of the drapes, and there was this thing over the ocean, this brilliant light, and it went slowly to the north over the ocean, and then it shot really fast to the south, really fast. And then it stopped, and then it started moving back towards the north again very slowly, and then it turned and came right up over the top of me. I got down on the ground, and I was hiding because I was afraid. I was like, what is that? I was afraid of it. But my husband had to get up really, really early, like 4:00 in the morning every morning, so I wasn't about to bother him. So the next day, it was all over town. The people in San Luis Obispo County, in Santa Barbara County, people in Kern County, and people in Monterey County, 4 counties in California. where people in towns and places all over that part of California saw it. Hundreds of people saw it and reported it in different places at different times. And that night, though, the night that I saw it, I had actually called the police. I called the Culver City Police Department and told them there's something out there. They told me, why don't you call Vandenberg Air Force Base? So I called Vandenberg. Vandenberg said they didn't have anything out there. So they didn't know what to tell me. I was like, okay. Well, then after it became, on the news and everything that hundreds of people had saw it, I got a phone call from MUFON. And I never heard of them. I didn't know who they were. And they wanted to come and talk to me. And they said the reason they chose me was because of the police report. There was too many people for them to talk to everybody, but there was 2 California Highway Patrolmen that were pulled over on Highway 1 that saw it. A lady that was down on the beach saw it, and I saw it, and all our stories collaborated with each other. So I was a more credible witness. So they came to my house and asked me questions and showed me pictures and held coins up to the window so I could kind of get a size comparison. And that was a real interesting, but I didn't put much stock in it at that time. I thought, well, it's probably military. I didn't believe in UFOs at that time. I believed the military had stuff. Now I believe in UFOs, but back then I didn't. That was 1979 and I was a young woman. And, then, of course, I know, I was going to tell you about my beloved friend Joan. Gosh, I love that woman. And she was like a mother to me from when I was a kid. She came from British Columbia. She was born and raised in British Columbia. And she saw actual Bigfoot and had pictures that she never shared with anybody but me and a few close friends. It outrivaled the Patterson-Gimlin film. What she had was totally accidental, but she kept it in a safe deposit box. And when I was about 17 or 18 years old, she brought it out and showed it to me. And I had never heard of Bigfoot. Never. So when she was talking about it, I was like, Mama Joan, what are you talking about? What do you mean? She says, Bigfoot, you've never heard of that? And I'm like, no. And she explained to me what it was. And she says, these things are real, Donna. And she told me about what happened to her up there in British Columbia. And I had absolutely no reason ever to doubt anything she ever said to me. And then she told me one of these days I'll get the film out and I'll show you. So we set it up and I got to see it. And it's actually through there, just like I saw that UFO through my window. They had a house with a huge picture window and they lived about 20 miles east from a town called Houston in British Columbia. And they were back in the sticks. And she said one day she saw this thing walk across and they were going to build their house. So they were in a trailer at that time. And she said she made Byron, her husband, move the trailer because she was terrified. And he was like, well, you probably saw a bear or what, you wanted to live out here and blah, blah, blah. But he moved the trailer for her away from the riverbank area to please her. But nobody ever believed her what she said she saw. But then one day when they took some home movies, then when they later viewed those movies, several times actually, until finally one day their son was saying, oh, wait, look out the window. They're looking out the window. No, the window in the film. Everybody looks out and there, clear as day, is a silvery white colored Bigfoot that walks right past the window, off in the distance, but it's obvious what it is. And it's so crystal clear. And then her husband backs it up and makes the film reverse and it walks backwards past there and it's going forward and back because Byron and Joan have both passed away now. So I can say this, I can talk about it, but there it was, plain as day. So I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that those things were real. And when the time came that I saw the Patterson-Gimlin footage, it had the same kind of walk, the same type of gait. But it never turned around and looked at anybody. It just was walking by, minding its own business. But it was so much clearer. It wasn't fuzzy because, see, nobody dropped a camera and got up and started running to film it. I mean, nobody was shaking because they were afraid. They were just filming people sitting on the sofa in front of the window saying, "Hi, this is Uncle Joe. This is Aunt Mary." They were just, it was so the camera wasn't shaking. There was no blurring. It was just crystal clear. This thing walks right by. And then Joan is like, "That's it. I told you. That's what I saw. I told you I saw something, Byron." And there was no denying. But I think Renee DeHinden, Grover Krantz had actually come to talk to her, and she refused to let that film out. She did not want to be made, well, look what they did to Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson. She was a very quiet, private person, and she didn't mind showing me. And I guess I don't know who told Grover Krantz about it, but somehow Grover Krantz had gotten in touch with her and came to talk to her about it, and they wanted to get a hold of her film, but she had it in a safe deposit box. She wouldn't let it go. And to this day, I don't know what happened to it. She passed away, Byron passed away, and I'm sure that her adult children probably got whatever, and who knows whatever became of it. So I knew there was such a thing as Bigfoot. And I know that there's such a thing as ghosts and spirits and angels and God. And I know that there could be a Loch Ness monster, but I'm not sure. But as far as spiritual entities being out there, I believed in that, always known that. And as far as physical, actual living physical cryptids, Bigfoot was the only thing for me. There was nothing else out there but that. So that's kind of some of the paranormal things that when I say I had a lifetime of, there's other ones too, but those are just kind of to give you an idea of what kind of things I've experienced.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.